us on Legacy Markets. Tonight, we want to explore an area in our economy that has grown significantly since 2019 and may be a large contributing factor to our economy. According to the UNDP, micro, small, and medium enterprises account for approximately 90% of businesses and 50% of total employment. In the Latin American and the Caribbean region, MSMEs have consistently been strong economic drivers, and they account for 99% of businesses in the region and more than 60% of regional employment. And in some low-income countries, they provide as much as 90% of formal employment and are responsible for more than a third of GDP. In Belize, more than 80% of businesses are MSMEs, and these provide roughly 70% of total private sector employment and income. Joining us on Zoom this evening is BELTRAID'S Executive Director, Dr. Leroy Alemendarez, to have a discussion on the effects MSMEs are having on Belize's economy. So welcome, Dr. Almendarez, and thanks for joining us on the show, especially during your very busy schedule.
Good afternoon, and you're very welcome. Indeed, it is very busy, but it's an interesting topic and something that we continue to talk about, to advocate for greater not only understanding, but as you rightly mentioned, the role that it really plays not only in our economy but regionally and globally.
Yes, definitely. And I think we hear so much about the MSMEs and the effects on the economy. But according to the UNDP's Investment Opportunity Areas Report of 2021, it is suggesting that more than 80% of businesses are an MSME, and they provide a large percentage of the income in the country. But what is the rate of increase that Belize has seen when it comes to MSMEs? Is it rising? Is it declining? We would love to hear your expert opinion.
I think one of the perspectives you can take it from is entrepreneurship, as a matter of fact, because there has been, a lot more in terms of innovation and those who are engaging in entrepreneurial activities, some because situations cause it to happen, but in other situations, it's basically, I don't like the word boss, but really, I want to be my own boss. And of course, I see a market, and my own creativity can be employed in such a way that I can get into that market because there's a target, a target audience that already exists. And if I can penetrate that, even if it means creating my own and be the only or the initial starter or the leader, I'm willing to do that. So then let's take the pandemic. The pandemic had a lot to do with, really fairs and things like that. But a quick response to your question is, yes, there has been an increase in terms of MSMEs in this country. And I must quickly state, because every opportunity I get now, that the definition of what is a micro, what is a small, and what is a medium enterprise in this country, that was changed. In fact, it was amended last year and included in the new Fiscal Incentive Act, which provides economic incentives for the sector, for MSMEs. But what for many, they still believe that the MSMEs, it means you're talking about a very, really a micro enterprise, for example, which might be a mom and pop or a one-person owner or something like that. But that definition has changed. And if I may quickly say now that the definition now is what it was before. It was less than 5 employees, and then it was in terms of sales up to 100,000 or less than 100, really up to 100,000. The definition is now less than 200,000. This is the all-inclusive definition, less than 200,000 to as much as 30 million. So that would tell you, as you indicate, that MSMEs now will now account for even more in terms of employment and contribution to income in this country. Because what would have been considered maybe a large enterprise before with a sales turnover of 30 million, and they now fit within this definition. So you could see, the increasing number that would then now be included when we look at that definition.
Yeah, most definitely. You mentioned two very important words here. You mentioned entrepreneurship, one, and I do want to thank you for giving us the definition of the micro businesses now, because as an entrepreneur myself, $200,000 is a lot of money. So it's very insightful to see that that is still considered a micro business, and that is why it makes up for so much of our economy here in Belize. But in regards to entrepreneurship and COVID-19, there were some serious setbacks for businesses on a whole, but it also created opportunities for creatives and entrepreneurs to really deep dive into their minds and create new products and new services. I, for myself, created a card game during the pandemic. But in your position as the executive director, what was the major effect that COVID had on your role?
Well, let's take, because my role comes in, when it comes to not only intervention, but advocacy in terms of getting support further. In 2020, because it was a shock, even though we saw it coming, and it was not if, but when, it was still a shock because there was an immediate impact economically on the country. And so one of the first things that we did, and I'm talking now here as Beltrade, we did conduct a survey to see what were the impacts, what were some of the immediate challenges that they were facing. Because if you're talking about a micro, remember a micro at that time was less than 5 employees. And so financing, that was a big challenge for them. In fact, some of them would have closed their doors. But during that time, in order to shore up the sector, there was a stimulus program that was introduced. And that stimulus program really helped with several things. One, it helped with retention of employees, which is very important. So retention of employees was important. It helped with some working capital, which means you could still be able to get those materials that you needed to, really need to continue to operate. But the big thing that many of them faced was the lack of a digital footprint. And what do we mean by that? The fact that you had to now be 6 feet apart, the whole social distancing and everything else that existed. Those who were not able, of course, you see Facebook got a lot more busier, or it got busier than it really, in fact, it's busier now too. But a lot of them pivoted, and I think that's an important word. A number of these, some of them, because as though the pandemic was a threat, it was also an opportunity, and threat should always be thought of as something that potentially can be converted or changed to an opportunity. Some of them pivoted. I didn't think about this. How many entities, or how many of us would have thought that at one point for a period of time that a mask would become a part of our everyday wear, a part of our clothing? As a matter, you saw people got so creative that there was a mask for each, every time you left the home. And then others joined in that because, really the mask was something that we so much needed. You saw things like testing booths for COVID. Yeah. So entities actually pivoted, and you find out that a number of them were able to sustain that, because that's what's important. You can't let it be just for a period of time, because as more people enter a market, then it means now it becomes a competition, you see, and that allows for even greater creativity. So we saw pivoting. We saw that many of those who did that just continued to operate, continue to find new businesses, because the other thing that must be included in entrepreneurship is innovation. Once you can think about an idea and the creative mind, and that's why now we're focusing so much on the orange economy, which is now the full use of your intellectual creativity, intellectual capital. And so for those who continue to be creative, those who continue to be innovative, not afraid to take risk, because that's another thing as an entrepreneur. If you're afraid to take risk, then more than likely you will not survive for too long, because you're saying, I need a full-time job, but I also need to be an entrepreneur. And so you saw a lot more of that happening. The other thing I must tell you is that There were so many. This is where, really it showed you again the intellectual creativity. A lot of apps were developed for different purposes. As a matter of fact, I was lucky to be invited as a judge in many of these situations. So that's another thing you saw, but you saw a full display of young people's creativity, and for those for the purpose of survival who found a way to survive, but additionally, the inclusion, or they included the use of technology in what they were doing, even if it was just social media.
Yeah, so speaking of pivoting, it's very important to recognize as well that a lot of the businesses have been virtual now. So because of COVID, many businesses shut down their offices to save money, and it was a lower overhead cost. Not to mention the apps that you mentioned. But in 2021, let us talk numbers now. 15 million people were operating to support sustainability of the micro, small, and medium enterprises, also known as MSMEs in Belize. And this project was to help protect employment and promote the economic recovery of MSMEs through hardships. But only 30% of the total IDB funding for this operation would finance climate change, which is a very important topic that we face every single day as Belizeans, considering that we have the Great Barrier Reef right there that ultimately protects us from erosions and natural disasters. But I do want to know, can you give us a synopsis of IDB support program, defining how businesses benefited or not from this project?
Well, the IDB has several projects when in terms of what they're doing to assist Belize with its economic recovery. I mean, you're talking about a study there, but that's a global study. That's not really just focusing on Belize. Belize has a population of about 450,000 right now. If you talk about CARICOM with the inclusion of Haiti, then it comes to about 18 million. So you're talking, about the whole region. But like I said, there, and as you have indicated, there has been, or too often, we believe, well, I won't say we believe because I'm advocate for the MSMEs, there is this misunderstanding that the greater contribution to the wealth of a nation or from the larger enterprises. But your statistics, when you mention your statistics in Belize now, like I said, with the redefinition, it's over 95% of businesses, it might even be close to 100% of businesses that now operate within that space. And they contribute globally, regionally, globally. The average is about 70% of employment, and I'm sure that will be increasing. And it's about 50% to the gross domestic product of a country, and we're talking about goods and services, because you tend to find out that a lot of these entrepreneurs engage in services. You asked the question about how much, in terms of IDB's penetration. Like I said, that's some study that you read from. But let me tell you what's happening now with the IDB. As a matter of fact, BELTRAIDE is engaged in about 4 different projects where the IDB is concerned. And one of them has to do with digitalization of MSMEs. The intention here is to digitalize 250 of them and to ensure that there's greater efficiency, where they're concerned. You mentioned climate change. Just this week, in fact, it concluded today, where the government is working with the United Nations through the UNDP to establish an integrated network for a financing framework having to do with climate change. Because you can also have, let me also add this, that in the past, you wouldn't have the breakout, if you would, we'd say the segregation, but the breakout of where you could say, well, okay, you classify these MSMEs. There's an industrial policy that is being developed that will look at orange economy, blue economy, green economy. So now you have green entrepreneurs, blue entrepreneurs, and orange entrepreneurs, taking into consideration, of course, that the orange economy is not just, again, looking at that, for some, it's, really the musicians or maybe those who are involved in arts and craft or something like that. That's not the case. The definition is greater than, really, it encompasses more businesses than just those. And then, of course, we talk about the blue economy, what exists, below the water with, fishers, and then green economy, especially now with our focus on complying with those, to climate change, meeting net zero by 2050 and all of that. So there's that digitalization project. I just put that in there. We also look at social protection, social inclusion in terms of agriculture. That's another project, that will assist farmers and things like that as well. In order to do trade with other countries, because we don't want our MSMEs to just focus or operate within the domestic space, within Belize, just Belize proper. We also want to see them export, especially with the trade imbalance that exists. And so there's a trade and investment single window, that is also being developed to help. When you talk about single window, I can press, go into on a laptop, on some software, and I can access all the forms that I need. I don't have to be running all over the place in order to do so. That's also support from the IDB. And I'm not referencing the IDB because you mentioned the IDB, but yes, that's some of the work that the IDB has been doing. It's always good as well to do pilot projects. So even if they extracted 30% or whatever percent you may have mentioned, pilot projects work. And if they succeed, then they become more attractive because you have success stories. And that's what you do where MSMEs are concerned. We at BELTRAIDE, that's what we do. We have training and employment or small business development center. We help with those who are ready to export. And of course, if you want to invest. And so we also make sure that we have these success stories. It makes it easier for us because we do write proposal in order to access funding, not only from the IDB, but from CARICOM Development Fund, etc., to promote, to provide resources, training, and all of those, training and advice, business plan development, etc., for these enterprises that want to become a part of the market, want to engage in some relationship with commercial institutions. Those are some of the things that we do.
Well, thank you so much for providing us with more insight. I'm just really grateful for this conversation because as an entrepreneur myself, we get to see the bigger picture here and the effects that MSMEs have on our economy as well as our livelihoods. But Dr. Almendarez, unfortunately, our time has come to an end. But I do want to ask if you have any final words that you would like to leave the audience.
Well, really, I'd like to two things. One, if you can get access to it, it's there, or you can check with us. The Fiscal Incentive Act that was replaced the old one last year, in March of last year, it allows micro, small, and medium enterprises to really access benefits, meaning that there are benefits that you can access. If you have a business and you want to import, you can import up to $1 million over 4 years. Exemptions, get exemptions for those. We have an MSME enhancement program. If really when it comes to labeling and materials and things like that, if you're engaged in that, you can contact us and you can also benefit from that as well. And the other thing is, for those of you who may be operating out there and you're not registered, know that you can register, and even if you weren't paying taxes before and you register now, you still will not be charged those taxes from the past. Don't be afraid to become a part of the formal system, because there are a lot of benefits that you can access for your business to continue to operate.
Thank you so much, and I hope your words resonate with our audience and our viewers. But unfortunately, our segment has come to an end, so I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll be right back.